The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
So we are here today with Lars Roobol, who's the head of measurement and monitoring at the Dutch National Institute for the Public Health and the Environment, and really one of the leading radiation experts in all of the Netherlands. Lars, it's so great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely.
I'm very excited about it.
No, you have a wealth of experience that myself and our whole audience wants to benefit from. But before we get into the work of the current day, perhaps you could take us back through your past and tell us, how did you get into this space?
Well, it all started when I was going to college. That was back in the 80s. I'm 55 years old now. And when I was doing one of my first exercises there on Leiden University in the Netherlands, that was in 1986. And you may know that 35 years ago, we had that incident in Chernobyl.
Yes.
So I had access to all these radiation meters, and I went outside with my pal, whom I was doing experiments with. And we could measure absolutely nothing. So we were like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, where's this radiation cloud?
Yeah. And of course, there are spots on Earth where you really can find it. But in the Netherlands, you could only measure it with very sensitive equipment. And that was when I also first heard the name of the institute where I'm working now, because those were the experts with these radiation gauges that could measure it. So after that, I was doing some other stuffs in physics, but about 10 years later, I was working on a university institute where they had a particle accelerator, and that is where I first encountered real radioactivity, and where we studied all sorts of exotic particles.
Do you remember, if I can ask you to take a step back even further though, do you remember even as a kid where you first got your interest in science and physics from? Or did you read a lot of books on the topic? Did you watch shows? How did you become fascinated by this?
Yes, I was one of these sad kids that never left their room.
Me too.
And I was always reading books. And I really loved, science about dinosaurs and things that happened in the past. And I also wanted to know why things are working and also how they are working. I was really interested in space. That was in the 1970s and early 80s, where we had Soyuz and the Americans coupling together at the building of the space station. I was really excited about that and really into science and into physics.
And then, so when you got to see this particle accelerator, this was like stepping into the future almost.
Yes. Well. Now I'm not doing real physics in a lab every day anymore, but every time when I visit some large institute where they have large things, and they make a lot of noise, and you hear cooling water going down, and you smell the oil of the pumps.
Yep.
Then I really get excited again. That takes me back to my youth.
Yep. Yep. I feel the exact same way. Every time I step into a big facility, when I went out to CERN, every time I just get like the tingly feelings, just seeing the big equipment humming.
Yes, it's that is like being a kid in a candy shop.
Exactly. So, okay. So tell me, where did your career take you? Where did you decide to really kind of focus in on and become an expert?
After I worked at that institute with the particle accelerator, I saw an advert that they were looking for a manager at the other side of the Netherlands. Well, at the other side of the Netherlands is not such a big deal.
You are drive.
When you go east-west, it's about 2 hours by car, and when you go north-south, it's 3 hours.
Amazing, amazing.
But there was a facility in a little town called Petten, and they have a material test reactor. And they were looking for someone to lead their research facility, and also the facility where they make radioactive medicine. Well, I thought that was very, very exciting. That was not only science, but you could do something with
applied, really applied. Yeah.
And you could really help people. And well, therefore I decided to work there, and they also thought it would be a good idea that I came there. And there I worked at that facility, and because they were working with humongous amount of radiation, also the manager needed to be a radiation expert, and you needed to know a lot about safety, a lot about well, ISO stuff, and that was my first step in becoming an expert.
And when you say ISO, do you mean ISO like the qualification, like the trade qualification, the industry standard qualification, or like isotopes?
No, really ISO 9001.
I see, right. Like these are standards on how things have to be built, essentially.
Yes, and there are also standards for facilities making well, they call them APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients. Then you go into the medical standards, because you don't want all sorts of particles not belonging there in the stuff you administer to people.
Yes. Can you maybe give our audience a bit of an explanation on what the nuclear reactors have to do with nuclear medicine overall? What's the relationship? I think, most people still don't realize that the radio stuff that they get in their medical treatment had to be created by man somehow in some magical machine. That maybe they don't even know that there's a magical machine. Maybe they think you just pull it from a tree or something. Can you explain to us what is all this?
Oh yes, certainly I can. Very many of the substances that we use, they are actually found in the 1940s and the early 1950s, and they were made using particle accelerators. One of the stuff or one of the substances is called technetium, and that is used for scans in people who have medical scans. Think about scans for cancer, for heart disease, coronary disease, is a substance called technetium-99. And they are using that 50 million times a year on patients all over the world. And it's called technetium because it doesn't exist on Earth. It really has to be made by man.
Wow.
And it was made in the 1940s in the US using a particle accelerator. And in the 1950s, people realized that they could make scans with it and really images of what is going on inside the body.
And the basic way that this works is you ingest it and then it shines a light from the inside out. Is that how the concept is?
Well, basically, yes. It emits gamma radiation, and you have a gamma camera on the outside of the person. And the good thing you can do with it is that you can bind it to all sorts of biological substances. For example, sugar, and sugar finds its way inside the body and it goes to the muscles. So it can go to the heart muscle. But you can also bind it to another substance that goes to cancer cells. And there it can highlight, as it were, the cancer cells in the body. So it's really cool stuff. But you need to have it in enormous amounts, and up until now, particle accelerators could not make it in such large amounts. So since the 1960s, reactors are making technetium, and they do that by bombarding uranium with neutrons. Well, that is what reactors are very good at. And the uranium falls apart into two larger atoms, and about 6% of all the time it is a molybdenum atom, molybdenum 99, which is radioactive, and when it's and when it becomes radioactive, then it becomes another atom, which is technetium 99.
I see.
So that's the way it's made.
So inside nuclear reactors, we're creating a version of an atom that doesn't exist naturally. And yes, the characteristics of this is that it emits this gamma radiation as a way to, let's say, stabilize itself, to pull back to a more comfortable atomic state of being. We're taking advantage of that property to hook it up to a sugar, to put it into the body, and then to highlight things that we want to find in order to diagnose people.
Exactly. And well, these are very exciting times for making such substances, because there's a lot of technical development going on also. Also in the US, there's this company that is finding out a novel way of making technetium, but then using a very large particle accelerator. And well, that's very exciting, because I think within 5 to 10 years, the way these substances are made, we'll see very new techniques, and we are also still going to use reactors, I think, but we will also see these particle accelerators coming.
Now, how many of these reactors exist across the world today that are producing this vital element for medicine?
Well, when you look at the largest ones, that are about 5 to 6.
Okay, not that many for the whole world, for 50 million doses a year.
No, and then there are some smaller ones that make make it for local uses. Most of them are in Europe. There's one in South Africa, one in Australia, and also in the US. You see more and more of these facilities coming, because also in the US people think it's such a vital thing to have. You want to make it yourself also, because when something happens and airplanes can't fly, then danger stuck in the US.
I see, like security of supply is an issue. And as far as I understand it, shelf life is also an issue. These things, from the moment that they're made, you have to get them to the hospital pretty quickly because the very property that we're utilizing them for, this disintegration almost, this emission of gamma radiation, is the thing that transforms it from useful to not useful at some point. So is that right? So is geography also important, how close we are to these reactors?
Yes. When you look at technetium, the amount of technetium you are holding in your hand, so to speak, halves every 6 hours.
Okay, so time is really of the essence.
Yes, and therefore it is very neat that this technetium is, so to speak, the daughter of molybdenum-99, because molybdenum-99 has a half-life of 66 hours.
Okay.
So that gives you enough time to fly it all around the world.
Got it.
But there are, well, very many of these medical radioisotopes. Some of them have half-lives of months or weeks, but there are also substances who have half-lives of minutes. So they need to be made at the actual hospital by a particle accelerator, and then they are going to the patient almost directly.
Oh my God! Which ones are these?
These are called PET isotopes. That's PET is a technique of making images of the body, and these ones are called oxygen and carbon, but then the radioactive versions of it.
Got it.
And these have shelf lives of minutes, only 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Wow. So the reactor that that you started working at, the medical reactor, was this one of the smaller ones or one of the bigger ones in the world?
No, it was actually, well, there are a lot of reactors who are smaller than that are university reactors. This one was a little bit bigger, but to give you an idea, it is a 50 megawatt reactor.
Okay.
So it makes 50 megawatt of heat.
That's pretty big. I'd say that's pretty substantial.
Yeah. So we do also have one university reactor in the Netherlands, and that is only 2 megawatt.
Got it.
But when you look at the full size power plant, it's about 1,000 megawatts. So that is more or less the scale of things.
Got it. So what is like Netherlands' history and experience with nuclear technology overall? You do have a full-scale power plant in addition to a couple of the research ones as well, and medical as well?
Yes, we do have one power plant. I wouldn't call it full scale nowadays. It was built in the early 70s, and it's almost 500 megawatt.
Okay. I still think that's big. I know some of the big ones are the 1,500 megawatts these days, but 500, it just seems like such a good size to me. The 1,500 ones, I understand economies of scale of size, but those are big projects. The grid is not really built for that type of interaction. I'm a huge fan of the 500 megawatt ones.
Well, that is what we are realizing are realizing now, because we are building so many wind farms and solar PV, that actually the 300 to 500 megawatt sizes are better for the electricity grid than the 1,500 megawatts are.
Yep, absolutely. Yes. And then so maybe, and this might be too broad a question, but see if you can answer it for me. What do the Dutch people generally think of nuclear? If you've had this around for a while, and you've got leaders like, scientific leaders like yourself that are pioneers in the medical field and in the research reactor field, and your universities understand it, is there a general feeling overall of, yeah, we understand nuclear, we like nuclear, or are there different feelings?
No, there are different feelings in the Netherlands. I would say now it's about 50-50.
Okay.
And it depends on where you live. When you live very next, or when you live very near to the power plant, then very many people think, well, it's okay, and maybe they work there, and they're used to it, and that is totally different from the parts of the country that are, well, more or less empty. They don't have large scale industry. They don't.
Not as
Depends on where you live.
Yeah, it depends on where you live, essentially. And then, so what role have you played just throughout your career in terms of being an advocate or being an educator throughout your country on these topics?
Well, the institute I work at now, the RIVM, that is a government institute, and our role is to help people and also to advise them on all sorts of matters. We have very many people who are working on viruses at our institute. So our name is very big at this moment because of the COVID-19 situation.
Yes.
But we also advise on all sorts of chemical substances, radiation, ionizing radiation, UV, cell phone radiation, but all things people worry about.
Do you get to, because your organization has such a broad mandate across all of these risk factors, are you able to take a balanced approach and explain are you able to explain relative risk? One thing that I found is a shortcoming of some of the organizations in the US that are just focused on radiation or just focused on nuclear protection is they don't understand it, or they don't want to, or they don't feel like it's in their mandate to explain relative risk. Do you get to do that?
We do get to do that, but it's very difficult. And that's because there is also another effect, and that is the perception of the public. And now, take for example terrorism. Very many people think that terrorism is this likely to occur to you, but in actual fact, it's this likely.
Yes.
And when you think about heart attacks, I think, well, this is my risk of getting a heart attack, but in actual fact, it's that large. So relative risks are very difficult because people react to different things very differently.
Yes.
And radiation is one of the things that they think it's this big, and it's actually that big.
Yes. One of the things, and tell me your opinion on this, because my opinion that I've developed over meeting with many experts in this space is that in our effort to over-explain and to overprotect people in terms of knowledge, give them knowledge about radiation, we actually make it seem like a bigger deal than it is. We actually increase their perceived sense of risk just by trying to explain to them over and over and over again. Have you found something similar or different?
Yes. We are now also doing research into public perception, and also in risk communication. And to give one example, when there was a fire, we used to warn the people with the message close your windows. And in our research, we found out that that wasn't working in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Dutch people are rather stubborn. And when somebody tells them to do something, then they think, well, let's think about that. Think about that again.
Yeah, yeah.
And now we tell them something different. Now the fire department says, smoke is not healthy. Do not come in contact with smoke. And then people start thinking, well, I might close the window.
I see. I see. Let them come. Yes. Give people a little bit of credit. Let them come to their own conclusions. Treat people like they're smart, and then they'll act in the right way, as opposed to being oppressive and overburdensome and telling people here's what you have to do, and then you kind of put them on the defensive. And then you make them act, maybe not in their best interest. I see this across all spaces. Yeah. Well, no, it's good to know that the Dutch people are stubborn. I call it, healthy skepticism.
Yes. And now we're also doing that with radiation. There was some years ago, there were these iodine pills that were given to the people. That was a political decision that everybody within a range of, a certain amount of kilometers from a nuclear power plant, they were offered these iodine pills so they could take them during an accident. And there we first did some research asking 1,000 people, what do you want to know? And what do you think about radiation? And by doing that research, we could make a website telling people, what to think about their worries, and we could really address the worries they had.
Yeah.
And we do that more and more now, and I think it's a very exciting research.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so you ask people instead of just you ask people what they think instead of just telling them what to think. Revolutionary. Yes. No, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing how wrong so many times we've gotten it in the past. In some places, we still get it wrong. But I love that. I love the way that the approach that you're taking. I love the approach that your country and your culture takes now in terms of giving people a little bit of benefit of the doubt, treating them like they're intelligent, and actually engaging with them. I love it.
Yes, and well, that is what I also have done. In my career, I always thought that it doesn't work when you have a polarized debate, for example, about whether or not to build a nuclear power plant, to really be the advocate. I really believe that when you give people honest information and let them decide for themselves, that they will do the right thing.
Yes, treat people like adults. Even kids. I think even we should treat kids like adults, and they'll act like adults. So tell me about that. Tell me about with nuclear energy. So you've developed, this long career with specialty expertise in radiation and medical technologies. And now you're at the institute, your local institute of radiation protection. But when did nuclear energy come into your view? And what were your opinions on it? And where do you see it fitting overall?
Yes, well, these are, of course, my personal opinions, because I can't speak for the government of the Netherlands. They are forming a new government right now, and it's a little bit exciting for me which side of the coin will come up.
Okay.
The politics are such that there is a chance that the new government will decide to build a new power plant.
Amazing.
But they could also form another government, because we have a multi-party system. And there could also be parties involved that are very, very much opposed to nuclear power.
And which are which?
It
Just
can go
because
either way.
I don't know your political system, and I don't think most of our audience does either. Can you just, what are the names of the parties even?
Well, the largest one is called VVD, and that is a modestly right-wing party, and that has been in government for 10 years now. And well, there are it is mostly such that the parties that form the government, they are center or center left, center right, and nowadays we need 4 parties to get enough votes in the parliament to form a government.
Okay.
Last elections we had over 30 political parties.
Oh my God. What are you guys, Italy all of a sudden?
Well, and now when you look at our parliament, we have 17 different political parties.
Wow.
So it's political really, really a lot more difficult than it was in the 1980s, where there were less parties.
And the way that it works in your system, since it's so fragmented, it's harder to get a majority of votes together to take any action. And that's why these coalitions are so important.
Yes. When we would adopt the US system, then for that party I mentioned, VVD, they would get all of the seats almost.
Okay.
But because we have a direct representation, so it's one vote, one seat in parliament. Well, the landscape is totally different.
I see. It's not a winner take all system like ours is. Got it.
So when you get 1/10 of the votes, you get 1/10 of the seats in parliament.
Got it. So okay, so the government is being formed. I'm not sure I exactly know what that means, but I'll assume that within a few months it'll happen. And then what happens is for nuclear energy specifically, does there have to be a vote cast, or is it just a general if the right coalition takes control, we'll just know that the general policy is pro-nuclear, or are there specific actions that need to be taken for nuclear?
Well, what is of course the issue at stake is that we are emitting too much CO2. And we need to do something about that.
Yes.
And we need to do it fast.
Yes.
So what is already going on is that we're investing in a lot of techniques to get that CO2 down. So we're building a lot of wind farms, also on sea. We're building a lot of solar PV. And we are okay until 2030. Then things are moving in the right direction. But then we have only done the easy part. And with the easy part, I mean, we are not selling any cars anymore than that are moving on fossil fuel. These are all going to be electric cars, and our electricity system will be reasonably low carbon. But then you also have the industry, and you have a lot of other things in your economy.
Yep.
Wanting more electrical power, wanting substances like that they need to use in their chemical processes. And these also have to be made with some sort of energy. And what we're going to decide in the Netherlands during this cabinet is what will the next step be. Yeah. And their nuclear power is one of the options.
Yes. And go ahead, please.
Yeah, and it depends on the lines. So the political parties that form government together, which way it goes. So it's really more a political decision.
Yep. And then, so let's say the political parties decide that they want it. What happens then? Is it a state-backed system, or are vendors just invited to come into the country and become independent power producers? What type of market and market forces exist to then, let's say the decision in theory and principle is made, yes, more nuclear. What are the other structures in place that would allow for or encourage nuclear development to occur?
Yes, that's a very good question. People high up in the state, they are thinking very hard about that, because you can say, well, we want it. All vendors are welcome. That didn't happen with the wind parks that we built, because well, builders need some sort of certainty that they're doing a good and that they're doing a good investment.
Right.
And we were not doing very well in the Netherlands in the past 15 years, because about 15 years ago we started building new coal plants, and now 10, 15 years later we're saying, well, what about closing them?
Yeah.
And these builders, well, they are not very happy about that, of course.
I see. What you're saying is, if 15 years ago the government invited coal to be built, and people assumed that they were going to finance these projects on a 40-year time scale or so, and halfway through that 40-year time scale they're being told, no, this is not part of the plan anymore.
Yes.
It scares other developers that might want to come in and do
Exactly.
something similar for clean energy.
And therefore, with wind parks and solar PV, we have got this subsidy scheme in the Netherlands. People or sellers of electricity, when the actual hour-to-hour price of electricity is lower than a certain amount, they get subsidized for the difference of that. And we have also auctions of wind parks. So there is some certain space where you can build a wind park. They even make a license for you, and then you can make a bid. And that works very well with solar PV and wind. And right now, our government is doing some research on what will invite builders of nuclear. What do they need to really come onto the market?
Yes. And then let's say that we, so they do that survey and they kind of come up with a plan, and maybe even then, create the right rules and market rules in place to make that happen. What else is left, let's say structurally, that needs to be in place for reactor developers to come to the Netherlands? Do you guys have a nuclear regulator that is trained up on new nuclear technologies? What about that aspect?
Yeah, we do have a regulator, and well, like in very many countries, the last 30 years there wasn't much building activity going on, so they know something about the power plants that are existing now, and of course they keep an eye on what is going on in the rest of the world. But I think what is needed is that when some party will want to build a reactor, well, that also there for the regulator, they need to build up certain knowledge about that type of reactor.
Yes.
And of course, they're very skillful people, and I well, I know that they will do a very good job.
Yep.
But it's something you have to take into account.
Yes. I mean, I like the fact that you guys already have a 50 megawatt research reactor, because many of the new designs that are coming out are about that size. You know, the small reactors,
Yes.
some of the SMRs are big. Okay, let's put those aside. But there's a whole nother class of reactors that are actually small, or sometimes they call them micro reactors. And I feel like any country that successfully oversees a research reactor program should have all of the institutional knowledge to be able to evaluate these new designs, because frankly, they're a lot smaller, and smaller is just easier to deal with. Am I right in assuming that?
Yes, but of course they are also more advanced than the things that were built in the 70s. So, and of course, people do their homework, and they keep up with the with the new techniques. But of course, it's well, safety-wise, it is better dealing with the 300 megawatt plant than with the 1500 one.
Yeah.
So
and probably even easier with a 10 or 20 megawatt.
oh yeah, certainly.
And we should also mention that there's another project going on in the Netherlands, the Polis project. Is that right? Is that another? What's going on there? Are they building it? Is it a new design? What is that?
Well, up until now, it is a proposal.
Okay.
To build a reactor of the order of 100 megawatts in the same facility where I have worked in Petten. And that is because the reactor with which these medical isotopes are built or are made now, it will be phased out one day.
I see. So they just want to be ready for when that happens.
Yes.
I see.
The old reactor, or the reactor that we have now, was built in the mid 60s. So when you want to continue that work, then you need to start planning.
I see. And just on that topic, though, what is it that prevents a reactor from continuing on indefinitely in the sense of swapping out components, swapping out cores, swapping out fuel, swapping out heat exchangers, swapping out pumps? Is there any theoretical reason why we can't just indefinitely extend the life of reactors? One piece at a time?
For that type of reactor, no. When you look at the nuclear power plant, then it has this, well, it's actually a large metal vat which is closed, and that is what builds up the pressure with which you make the steam eventually.
Yeah.
And that large vessel that is being bombarded by neutrons, and that alters the mechanical properties of that vessel. And ultimately, then it needs to be renewed. So for power plants, it's really too expensive to renew that vessel. But with an open pool reactor, it's open at the top, and you can look into the water and you see the reactor giving off its nice blue light. And sometimes it can be economically done to renew that vessel. And in the Netherlands, it was done about 30 years ago. And it is really like owning a car that is getting a bit older.
Yeah.
So it needs a new exhaust pipe, and then it needs new tires, and it is just a matter of economics and whether you love that car or not. whether or not you do it.
Yep. Yep. So tell me about what else is next. If we're looking forward into the future, we've done a nice little overview of the existing technologies that your country is familiar with, your background and experience, the organization that you're at now. Tell me, what's coming next. And we've spoken about the KPMG survey that's going to advise the government, and a little bit about the framework that needs to take place. But just what do you see? Like if you were to put on your magic cap looking forward, what do you see happening, and maybe what are some extra things that we might need to change or take action for to encourage the future that you want?
Okay, that's a very exciting question. I can answer in a couple of ways. First, I see more work coming for me at my institute. For either they are going to decide that they want new power plants, and then they will come to our institute with all sorts of questions about safety, about radiation, and so on and so forth. Or they will decide not to build it, and then it's going to be time to deal with our radioactive waste. And then they also will come to me with questions about safety and radiation protection and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So well, that is a good thing for my institute and for me also. But well, let me also give a more serious answer.
Yeah.
I would love to see within the coming 10 years that we can do something about the system of radiation protection. And there are a couple of things there. One thing is the way we prepare ourselves for incidents and accidents. And the past years, there was some very exciting research about whether the evacuations in Chernobyl and Fukushima really were necessary.
Really were necessary. That's a nice way of putting it. Do you mean if they did more harm than good?
Well, that is what we know now.
Yeah.
But I have also done a lot of exercises about incidents, and I know how hard it is when you know only half of what is going on to really make the right decision. So I really don't want to say anything nasty about people in Chernobyl and Fukushima, because they did their utmost. But what we have learned now is that really these evacuations did more harm than they did good.
Yeah.
And well, we are also doing research into that at my institute.
And what becomes of this research? Because to me, it seems, I actually think that research that you just mentioned is probably one of the most important things in the entire nuclear sector to get right, and then to get that information out there. Once your research is complete, once it's conducted, how is it going to be disseminated and implemented in regulations across the world?
Yes, that's a difficult thing, of course, because we are a tiny country, and most of these rules they are made on a very high level at the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency of the UN. And how can we, as a small country, influence all of the world? And we think that we can best do that at the scientific level.
Yes.
Because at the scientific level, you can make more impact by talking to your peers, your fellow scientists in, all of the world. You can write articles about it and people can read that. And the idea is to well, that these ideas will be incorporated over time, also in the thinking of other countries.
Yes.
And then it's time to return to the IAEA level and make some real political decisions there.
Yeah, it's very frustrating to me, because I think that if the result of your research is what I think it might be based on the conversations that I've had, that evacuations are not the proper course of action in the case of an accident, especially a light water reactor, where after Fukushima, we understand what happens, we understand where the radionuclides go, we understand how much is dispersed and its potential impact on people. If we decide that is truly the case, that we should not be doing evacuations, then I think that the impact that that would have on public perception would be positive too, because that's why people, though, if you ask people why maybe they don't want nuclear, it's not because they're really afraid of radiation. It's afraid that they're going to be kicked out of their homes. You know,
Yes.
like that's what people don't want. People don't want their lives to be ruined. People don't really think much about the medical attributes of radiation.
Huh.
And so if we can just get that off the table, if we can just say, listen, no matter what, nobody's going to ask you to leave your home, then I think people would like nuclear more.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes me think about a research we have done recently around a large chemical plant in the Netherlands, and there we have asked people whether they feel safe, because these plants they emit tiny amounts of chemicals, and what some people do in the surrounding things is they start to worry. And
when you ask them if they feel safe, you're saying that's when they start to worry.
Yes. Then even more so. But well, you first see some articles on websites or in the local newspaper, and when then people from a government institute like we come and ask them whether they feel safe, well, then it's making it even worse. But when you look at it scientifically, the chemicals emitted, which they inhale, then they have a very small risk.
Right.
But because of the worrying of what's going on in their heads, they actually are at more risk, because well, people who worry, they start to smoke more, they start to they turn to alcohol. They are leading a less healthy life. And that is what we also saw in Fukushima. Very many of these people, they got taken out of their homes. They were losing their work. The people they met every day, their neighborhood was gone. So the suicide rate went up, alcoholism went up, all sorts of things that are not healthy for people began to appear. And those are secondary effects of the evacuation.
Yeah.
And well, that's a very sad thing. And when we would have let them live there, then maybe they were a little bit more at risk because of the radiation, but because they still had their sports, their cinema, their neighbors, and so on and so forth, they would lead. I think they would lead net healthier lives.
Yeah. One more technical question, and then after that, I'll give you just the final word. Because I don't get to ask too many people this, and it's always a topic of interest to me. Does your organization conduct or review the literature on low dose radiation studies, and if there's a threshold or no threshold?
Oh yes, I do even have a PhD student working on that.
Okay. Maybe I'd be able to interview them as well at some point. That's a topic of great interest to me.
Yes, he's finished in about half a year, so then I could give you an email.
Perfect.
But it's a very interesting subject. Yes.
Yes.
You want me to tell something about it?
just a quick, maybe just a few minutes on it, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, well, what we know about the effects of ionizing radiation, we know only at high dose and at high dose rate. And
well, what is high dose and high dose rate? If you could just give me some units to think about.
Yeah, dose is measured in millisieverts in Europe. And about 100 millisieverts is a high dose.
Okay.
And tenth of a millisievert an hour, or 1 millisievert an hour, is considered a rather high dose rate. Because when you look at nature, from where we live and the soil and the air, we get about 1 millisievert per year. So that's very much lower. And it is unknown at low dose rate and at low dose what the effect is. And therefore we assume that also a low dose could in theory give the effect that you get cancer, for example. But we can't see it statistically because ionizing radiation is not very good at giving people cancer.
Right. It's not a very potent carcinogen, is what we're saying.
But exactly.
The ionizing radiation. Yeah.
And
compared to many other things that we deal with, like oxygen.
Yes. Yes. Eating an apple.
Yeah.
But what we're doing research into is how low dose rates and low dose can have an impact, and we're looking, for example, at people getting a CT scan. That's a medical dose, and it's supposed to do more good than it does bad. But there is a theory that that could give you some adverse effects in 10 to 15 years time. And what we're looking at with this PhD student is whether we can match our theories with things we see going on in cell cultures, and we give a dose to those cells and see what happens there. And then the goal is to figure out what then will happen in humans.
Got it.
And it's not finished yet, so I can't tell you any of the results, but it looks like that at low dose that the risk is lower than at high dose.
Okay. Okay, and that could be a whole nother episode, so we'll push that aside. All right, final word is on you. What message would you like to leave our audience with?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Well, one of the messages I can give the audience is that the world would be a lot better place if we could learn to deal with our fear of radiation. And with that, I mean is that the most adverse effect we see in day-to-day life, that are the effects of fear, and not the effects of ionizing radiation. And when we learn to love it a little bit more, then we can open up to this wonderful technology that we have.
Lars Roball, couldn't end on a better note than that. Thank you so much for sharing your time, insight, expertise, and wisdom with us.
Well, you're very welcome.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.